Thank you for all of this. Again, you've provided so much value for everyone who's watching and listening today. I want to throw maybe one more question at you, and then we can start to wrap up. I know your time is very valuable. Um, so I was talking to the deputy director, former deputy director for intelligence at the CIA last week when I was interviewing her, and we talked about the impact of COVID on the world, and on her specifically. We were talking about intelligence for her, but it made me think about you as well. You know, we have been moving. I think there's been a movement to try to get more public transportation and so on and so forth. And now with COVID and people being, not together, not maybe want to ride together. I guess I had a question, not necessarily where do you see the future of transportation going given a COVID environment, but how do you go about convincing people to change their ideas given the COVID environment? I think a lot of people may be wedded to this is the way we need to move. And now, given COVID or future COVID, we may need to be thinking about this differently. So, how do you go about changing people's minds to get move them off of the platform they're latched onto?
Well, I'm gonna answer this in a different way. Um, so I think sometimes, so it's necessary to recognize the fact that we aren't going to be able to build our way out of traffic congestion, climate change, all those different things with our public right of ways, right? And even in our region, there's probably one, two, three more widenings of sorts that could happen, and then that's pretty much it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's our street grid. Um, so the question is more about how do we maximize that? And from an economic standpoint, from a traffic mitigation standpoint, from an affordability standpoint, you know, we have to think differently about what mobility looks like for the future. And it can't just be a car, right? Our West Ashley area of the city, which has our most densest population, 84% of those residents leave West Ashley every day in their individual vehicle. That's just not sustainable. But over
Mm-hmm.
60% of them said they would choose another mode of transportation if they knew it was connected, affordable, um, safe, right? So they've already given our mandate. Obviously, that those statistics were done pre-COVID, but they've already given that mandate. So it's not just simply, how do we make transportation more connected? It's also about what's being built in West Ashley that gives people an option of work, play, health, and otherwise in the immediacy of the area. And so I really don't like this dichotomy, but it's something that's used. This idea of choice riders versus dependent riders always comes up about how do you create mode shift, especially for those who can willingly choose to own a car and otherwise. And I think there's specific work that has to go with that, but a lot of that is through show and tell. At least in my experience being here in Charleston, right? People have the NIMBYism, not in my backyard, or change everything but don't touch nothing until they actually see it, and then all of a sudden it's let's figure out and make that happen. And so I think there's multiple ways of looking at this. One is the fact that we can't just make our decisions about what mobility should look like for those who can choose. If you look at our statistical data, I'll just use Charleston. I won't talk about nationally. If you just lose our statistical data, we're number one in the state in bike ped death and injuries. 43% of them are African American. Our fixed transit routes, 69% of our riders are African American. Over 70% of our riders make $45,000 or less, and about 77% of our riders don't own a car. Right, that's our existing ridership. So when you say transit, the vast majority of our transit riders today are dependent on that service, whether there's COVID or not. Right. So in my mind, when I'm talking about transit and whether or not it's sustainability, there's no choice in that matter for the
Yeah.
ridership that we're currently looking at. Obviously, that's for our future. That can't be the only type of ridership we have. But in terms of our existing ridership, that's just facts. Right. So how do we make that as safe as possible for those who are already dependent on the service? Then the other piece of it is how do we maximize policy so that when we're talking about transportation opportunities and mitigations for the future, we're not just putting that onus on municipalities to figure out. We're putting it on these developers who are coming to our cities and are attracted to the urban culture and want to create something new, right? So, you know, Charleston just got, again, for the 10th year, the #1 tourist city in the country. We have 50 people moving here to our region daily. And so we changed our policy. So now every major development that happens in this city, when they do they have to do a traffic study and they have to do transportation mitigation. Now today, based on that study and what type of triggers are hit, they will have to provide transit accommodations within their project scope, or they can't get their CO, right? Which means they can't move their certificate of occupancy. So we have projects all over the city that are now incorporating transit accommodations within their concept designs, because their traffic generation for their new site of 300 new residences or a hotel or whatever that is has to be mitigated. And it's not going to be mitigated just through general vehicular accommodations. It's also going to be, so through that, we're putting the burden on the developer of cost, but we're saying to the general public that this is a priority for execution. And so there's things, and then the third place is just like major projects that can shift the bill. So we're building a $400 million 26-mile bus rapid transit system connecting 3 municipalities. And the hope there is that we're showcasing something new. You know, that's that show and tell piece that gives people a sense that this is actually possible, this works, this is a reliable alternative for that. So, you know, obviously there's no guarantees along how we move with that, but I don't think that, you know, the alternative of trying to build our way through individual vehicles to mitigate our transportation and congestion on our roads, it's been proven over and over again that that's not going to work, right? And so we have to think about other ways of which, whether through micromobility, biking, walking, rideshare and other particular aspects, and then also our transit aspects, both for fixed routes and also, you know, BRT, and in other cities, it's bigger things than that allow us to give people options and choice of how they get from point A to point B. And obviously, for my interest, that also answers the equity question of those who are dependent on those ways as well.
Well, I mean, to me, it sounds like what you've just done is you said, you set your priorities and you're steadfast in those priorities, and then you're just going to be relying on creativity. And I think that's a great method. If that's what you're saying, it sounds like a great method, because you're keeping your values. You're saying, look, this is the people we have to serve. This is the ultimate outcome we have to have. We're not going to change that. Let's find a new way to make sure we make this happen. Whether that be, you know, you working on new things or putting on the developers to find new ways. You know, everyone talks about the creativity of the private sector. You know, allowing them the space to come to the table with new ideas sounds like a really good idea. Hello, everyone. This is Alex Tremble from GPS Leadership Solutions, and if you found this last interview to be awesome, spectacular, and actually you benefited from it, let me tell you, this is only the tip of the iceberg. Visit the alextrembleshow.com, information below in the description, and that's where you'll find the full uninterrupted interview. And I'm telling you, there's so much great content you'll hear from this past leader, as well as all the other leaders we've already interviewed. So remember, don't just look back, reach back. If there's someone who you think will benefit from this interview or any of the other interviews, make sure you share it with them. Click the like, click the subscribe, and as I always like to end all my sessions, stay strong, stay positive, and definitely stay moving.